We're going to start by identifying the parts in the machine that are involved in the timing process. This is our needle bar screw, our needle. This is our hopping foot, and the shaft goes into the machine right behind where your needle bar screw comes out. We've got our needle plate and our needle plate screws. Then underneath our needle plate, pardon my hand, are our spacing washers, one thick and one thin, for any machine with that thread cutter on it. If you don't have a thread cutter, those washers will not be there. This is your thread puller arm. It's part of your thread cutter assembly. Then we'll take a look down below. Now we're looking from the top of the hook assembly to identify a few parts in the hook area. This is your hook assembly, and this tip right here is what's called the hook point. This part kind of looks like a pair of nippers with a rounded edge that's pointing away from the needle and a sharp edge that's pointing towards the needle. Your hook point is what actually catches a thread from the back side of the needle to complete your stitch. If we look a little further back, this is one of the 3 screws that holds that hook assembly onto the hook shaft. Right behind, you see our hook collar, and in behind that, just peeking out of the gearbox, is the hook shaft bushing. That's going to be on older style machines. 2008 and newer did not have the hook shaft bushing, as they redesigned the gearboxes sometime around early to late 2008. This view from the side of the machine also shows you the hook point part of the hook assembly. You can see our bobbin basket. That's the black part that's inside. You can also see your hook finger that's holding this bobbin basket, keeping it from moving from side to side. As we travel back behind the hook assembly, there's an air space in between the back of the hook and your hook shaft collar. This air space is going to be important for us in doing adjustments to the hook shaft collar and also as part of the timing process. This view from the underside of the machine clearly shows you your bobbin basket. Silver part around the outside is the rotating hook, and this is your hook finger. And you have one solid screw there, Phillips head screw, that holds that hook finger in position. As you rotate the hook assembly around, you can see the silver part rotates around the basket. This piece right here in the hook is what we call a thumb of the hook assembly, or the thumb on the mitten. This is a spot where we'll be looking for burrs if we have any needle breaks on the hook assembly. I've rotated the hook assembly around so we can see the thumb on the mitten a little bit more clearly here. The area around the outer edge inside the curve would be like the webbing between the thumb and your hand. And along the flat area here, those are all spots where you'll be looking for burrs. As you rotate the hook assembly a little more, we come around to your hook point area, where your 2 pieces of the hook point come together and they start forming a single solid piece of metal. This is the other area where you'll be looking for burrs if you have a needle break. Those should be very smooth. First step, obviously, if you're retiming your machine, most likely you broke your needle. I do have a needle in this machine, so I will need to take it out for the timing process. Just going to loosen my needle bar screw, get that needle out of the way. Now we need to be able to see down through the throat of our machine, so we need to move our needle plate out of the way. Very first thing that we'll do is take out this front screw in your needle plate and loosen the one in the back of the needle plate. First screw's out. Once that back screw is loose, you can then hinge your needle plate over out of the way. Right away, I'm going to put my screw back in to hold our two washers that are in for spacing on the machine. I put the screw right back in the machine to hold those washers in place. They have a tendency to go for a walk sometimes and they don't come home. Tighten down my screw. Then you're able to see down inside the throat of the machine and look directly at the hook assembly. On this Millennium machine with the thread cutter and also the George machines, you will have these spacing washers on your machine. The spacing number of washers may vary, but we want to make sure that we don't lose those washers during the timing process. The process that I'm showing you today is going to include taking the hook assembly entirely off the machine and sanding down the shaft that the hook assembly was attached to. This process, although it sounds very scary, is actually the easiest way to retime your machine if it has to be completely retimed. Because the set screws on the machine are tightened down onto the shaft, that makes divots in the shaft, which make it much harder for you to pull the hook assembly off. You look at it and you think, well, once you loosen those screws that the hook assembly will just fall off the machine, but it's not going to do that. And there is a specific way that we need to do that to make sure that we don't hurt the machine. The first thing that we'll need to do is get the hook finger out of the way. Obviously, this is holding your bobbin basket in place, and with it in position, you cannot pull the hook assembly off the machine. There is one Phillips head screw underneath the machine that holds the hook finger in place. So we need to remove that screw. Then the hook finger itself can be pulled out of position. Or as you can see, this one's a little hard to get out. So I'm actually going to pop it out from the top of the machine, very carefully using my screwdriver, just to pop it out of the way. This is your hook finger. You can see at the end, it has a hook at the very end of it. That hook should be pointing up in the air when we reassemble the machine. Now that the hook finger is off, this would be a good time to check along the edge of the hook finger for any scratches or burrs that may have been caused by a needle break. On this hook finger, you can see there is a long groove that runs down the front end of the hook finger. That groove was caused by a needle break. That groove can also cause thread breakage. This would be a good time to then sand that groove out with your emery cloth again and make sure everything's smooth. Now that we have our needle plate out of the way, this is a good time for us to check out our parts on our machine to make sure that nothing has been damaged. We can evaluate the hole in the needle plate, which if you've had a needle break, there's a possibility that it may have scratched the inside of that hole. I have a needle plate from another machine where the scratches are very evident on the faceplate, scratches on the top don't concern me as much as the ones inside the hole. Those will give you thread breakage problems as well. The easiest way to check for this is to take a length of thread, run it through the hole on your needle plate, and then run the thread around the inside of the hole to see if you feel the thread catch, or you hear any noises from the thread running over a groove that's in that needle plate. If you do find a groove there, you can use emery cloth or emery cord. Several different variations of that are available. The Mitchell's Abrasives number 57 is the one that we use at the factory for buffing out the hole in the needle plate. Mitchell's emery cord, the outer edge is very rough, and the longer you use it, the rough grit falls off and it gets lighter and lighter, so eventually you are just buffing the hole in the needle plate. Emery cloth can also be used for buffing out the hole in the needle plate. Most generally you'll find this emery cloth in full sheets. However, we do have a nice roll here that we have at the factory we use for the timing. The nice part about the emery cloth is it is fabric backed, so you can tear off a chunk, whatever size you need, for doing the buffing on your machine. If we do have burrs inside the hole of your needle plate, you would thread your emery cloth or emery cord through the hole in the needle plate and run it around the inside of the hole, a lot like you were flossing the inside of the hole with your cord. This will help buff the top, the bottom, and the inside of the hole and get rid of any scratches or burrs that may have been caused by a needle break. Once that's done, you would then check again with your piece of thread to make sure that your groove has disappeared. That one is all good. Now that our hook finger is free, you can see that the bobbin basket will spin freely inside the machine. The next step is taking out the 3 screws that hold the hook assembly on the shaft. I'm going to rotate the flywheel so the entire hook assembly will turn and we can see all 3 screws. There's our first one, and there's one on the flat spot on the hook assembly, and there is our third one. Looks just like our first one did. With our long-handled screwdriver, we'll loosen these 3 screws. And you want to loosen them just about a full turn. You'll take the screws out. A lot of times they're very hard to get back into that hook assembly. And here's our last screw that we're loosening now. Now that the screws are loose, you can see the hook assembly doesn't, as I mentioned earlier, doesn't just come right off the machine. At this point, what we need to do is use the airspace that is behind the hook assembly. Right behind it, there's a black collar that has a set screw in it. That's something we'll be working with in another one of our adjustments. But we're going to use that collar as our pivot point for our screwdrivers to pry the hook assembly off the machine. Easiest way to do that is to come up from underneath the machine. I'm going to pull my screwdriver up underneath. Now what you don't want to do is come clear up through the throat of the machine and use this part of the machine for your pivot point for your screwdriver. That can cause damage to the gears in the gearbox. It helps to have 2 screwdrivers in your hand to walk the hook assembly off the shaft. Come in from each side into that little airspace with the tip of your screwdriver, and then just walk the hook assembly off the shaft. Putting even pressure on two sides will make it much easier to get the hook assembly off. Gets to a certain point, you may want to also cross the tips of your screwdriver to get a little bit more reach with your screwdrivers. Once it's past your divots from your set screws, then you can pull it right off your machine. Now that we have the hook assembly off the machine, this is a perfect time to check to see if there have been any scratches in the hook assembly caused by needle breaks or the needle deflecting and hitting the hook assembly in its rotation. That can also happen without the needle actually breaking and could cause you problems with thread breakage. So part of the hook maintenance procedure would obviously be to do this with the hook still on the machine, but this does give us the opportunity to see the areas on the hook assembly that could need some buffing or routine maintenance without it being on the machine. If we look in this area here, you can see there's several scratches caused by needle breaks. Then as you rotate it around, the next area would be right above where the screws are here. This area is where your needle's going up in its rotation and can cause scratches along that area of the hook assembly. Just past that area is what we call the point of the hook assembly. This tip here is very sharp, and we want it to be that way. This is an area that you will not buff or touch with your emery cloth, as you can damage the entire hook assembly. If you have scratches along the edge, that may not necessarily mean you have to replace the hook assembly. It may just need some buffing with the emery cloth. Anytime you buff this area with emery cloth, though, be sure to give the hook assembly a good bath with WD-40 and follow it up with oil. Now we can see the areas on our hook shaft where our set screw is tightened down and cause the divots on the shaft. So I rotate the hook assembly, rotate the flywheel. We can see those areas on the hook shaft that made it hard for us to get our hook assembly off. This is where we're going to use our flat file to file down the rough areas on our hook shaft. We're actually going to let the machine do the work for us, though. If you hold the file flat against the shaft, when the machine is on in manual mode, that shaft will turn, thus allowing you to buff off the rough areas on the shaft. You don't want to make the shaft smaller. You're just getting rid of the extra divots that were there caused by the set screws before. So what I'm going to do is turn the machine on at a low speed so that hook shaft will be rotating. Gently hold my file flat against the shaft and let the machine do the work for me. You also, at this point, want to make sure that your set screws are backed out far enough so that the screws aren't protruding inside the hole. That'll make it hard to get on the hook shaft, and you'll think you need to do more buffing, where it's really just a set screw problem. Once it is buffed, the hook assembly should slide on easily and rotate freely on the shaft. One of the things that we started doing to help out the timing process is actually marking the needle, and I've kind of drawn out here what the needle looks like from the side view, so we can get familiar with the scarf of the needle, which is this little cutout area in the back. When we're doing our timing process, we want the hook assembly to hit below the halfway point. So So I've marked about the halfway point on this drawing here. This is where you would be marking your new needle that you're going to start your timing process with. It's right about halfway. Then as you follow the flat part of the scarf down, right before this little kick at the bottom where it angles back, that's where your second mark is going to be. This area in here is your sweet spot for your timing. This is where we want our hook assembly to touch, below halfway and right above the little curve at the bottom. Now that we have our needle marked, we're ready to start our timing process. One quick note on needles though, we do want you to make sure you purchase your machine needles from APQS. We have done testing with the needles, and because of their stitch quality and how we time our machines, we know that the needles that we sell are going to give you the stitch quality that you're looking for from your APQS machine. We cannot guarantee needles from other companies. Although they may work, we may also have some issues with stitch quality. So just make sure that you get your needles from APQS. Now we're actually going to insert our marked needle into the machine itself. Just a quick note, make sure that you've marked a brand new needle. It's not going to do you any good to time your machine to a bent needle. We put the needle into your needle bar shaft, and we want to make sure that it's as high up into the needle bar as you can get it. And we are going to snug our screw. You notice I am using a little bit longer screwdriver to make sure that we get our screw in tight. When we're doing the timing process, we do want to make sure that the needle is in straight. And the easiest way to do that is to use a flower head pin or another pin that is very fine. What we do with the pin is we put it into the eye of the needle, and then let the pin drop. That will tell us which direction our needle eye is pointed. When we're doing the timing procedure, we want that needle to be dead center straight. We can see here that I have the needle a little bit off to the left when you're standing at the front of the machine, so I do need to make an adjustment to get that needle straight again. I've pulled the hook assembly off again just to show you real quick how to get our landmarks for our hook assembly in position so we can then start the timing process. We need to make sure that our oval slot in our bobbin basket is up for our needle to go down into, and then have our hook assembly, the hook point, at the top as well when we're looking down through the throat of the machine. I've got a piece of white paper behind here so we can actually see this shot a little bit better. We need the oval hole in your bobbin basket to be right up on top, and your hook point will be right up on top as well when you're looking at the hook assembly in the machine. So this is how I hold the hook assembly when I'm putting it on the machine to start our next step. We've now moved the camera around behind the machine to look at it from a different angle, so you can see the oval slot in the bobbin basket. It's now up on top, and our hook point is up on top as well. Those are our two landmarks that we use when we're doing the timing process. Now what I'm going to do is hold this hook assembly in this position, and by turning the flywheel, I'm going to put my needle down into that oval slot in the bobbin basket, and I'm just going to get my hook point fairly close to my needle. This point will know where to put our hook finger, which is going to be the next step. Putting our hook finger to make sure that our hook goes up. We're going to put this in position to hold our hook assembly in place. We're going to put our hook finger in position, making sure that the little hook on the end points up to the ceiling. Push it close enough to the hook assembly to hold that bobbin basket in position, but not so close that we can't move our hook later if we need to further away from the back of the machine. We're going to set our 1 Phillips screwdriver with our screw back underneath the machine to put that Phillips screw back in place and hold the hook finger in position. Sometimes the hook finger may be tight enough that you don't have to hold it in position with your finger. Sometimes it helps just to hold it with your finger. Make sure it doesn't move on you. All this prep work that we've done up to this point has gotten us to where our hook is on, our hook finger is in position, and our needle is all the way down in very lowest position. Now we're actually ready to start the timing process. What we've done is break the timing process down into 4 steps. The very first step is the needle bar depth, and that is how far down into the hook area is that needle going each time it reaches its lowest position. We want to be able to see, when we look through the front end of the machine, the entire eye of the needle with a little bit of silver above. If there's any adjustments that need to be made with your needle bar position, your needle bar access hole is behind this front cover here. So you may need to move this front cover out of the way on machines that have the stitch per inch meter on the front. Ultimate 1, Ultimate 2 machines without that meter will just have an open port to access that hole. We have to take the 2 screws out that are on each side of this front cover here, and that's where you use your Phillips screwdriver with the number 2 tip. I'll take those screws out now. Okay, which I'm not going to take. This is one of our 2008 and newer style machines that has the flat front cover. This one also has the quilt glide feature on the front cover. In order to get to our needle bar clamping screw with these machines, take our cover plate screws off again. You're going to pull this cover off to the side. That's going to expose the circuit board that's on the front end of the machine. Now our needle bar clamping screw access hole is behind this little circuit board. In order to get to it, we're going to have to gently pull down on these wires and unplug this wide ribbon cable connector from your circuit board. Then you have access, without taking a chance of damaging any wires, to your needle bar clamping screw in the front end of the machine. The rest of the timing will be the same as with any other machine, but once your needle bar depth has been set, you'll plug this wire connection back in again. See, our red wire is on the left side of this connector. Just want to make sure that you get it pushed up and snug, and then you can reposition your cover. Now that we've got our screws out of our front cover, we're just going to hinge this down and we'll be able to get to the access hole for our needle bar clamping screw. Luckily, with this older style machine, there's no circuit boards or any wiring that we have to disconnect in order to get to our clamping screw. With the Ultimate 1 and Ultimate 2 machines, the Lenny, the George, none of those machines have this front cover with the stitch meter on them. So those machines, we won't have to worry about that part. Now that we can get to our needle bar clamping screw, any adjustments that need to be made in the needle bar depth can be made from this position. Inside the front end, this little access hole, this is in the front end of all the machines, is how we get to our needle bar clamping screw. We can see how small that hole is. That's why we need this narrow blade screwdriver to get inside. Now what we can see in this video is the position of our needle into the hook assembly. How low it's going, making sure that it is in very lowest position by turning the flywheel back and forth. You should be able to see the entire eye of the needle and some silver above the eye, which right now we've got too much silver above the eye, so our needle is going down too far into the hook assembly. We need to loosen our needle bar clamping screw and reposition our needle bar by moving the entire needle bar up and down inside the machine until we get the position that we're looking for. My needle bar clamping screw is now loose. By twisting and pulling on the needle bar, I can raise it up to the point where I can see the entire eye of the needle and just a little bit of silver above the eye, not quite half an eye's worth of silver. Tighten up the clamping screw to hold your needle bar in position. And this is a screw that you want to get very tight. So when you have it in the right position, get mean with the screwdriver. Tighten it as tight as you can. Once your adjustment has been made to your needle bar depth, we need to reinstall your front cover on the machine. Put your screws back in the cover plate, and after this point, we don't get inside the front end of the machine at all. It's very easy once we get into the next steps of the timing process to think, since my needle's not in the right position, that I need to go in and readjust this clamping screw. But that's not true. This first step, once it's done, then your hand's off in that part of the machine and you don't touch that part again. From now on, it is going to make a difference in which way we're turning our flywheel. We always want to make sure, as we're doing the timing process, that it's turning clockwise, which is going to be down on the tension side of the machine or up on the non-tension side. This machine does have a flywheel cover on, so our adjustments will all need to be made reaching through the throat of the machine and pushing the flywheel up. Now the next step that we're doing is bringing our needle up by turning the flywheel in its regular rotation while we hold the hook assembly up on top of the machine here. Hold this hook point right behind your needle. This is a part where it's easy to think that we need to adjust our needle bar depth because our needle is not where we want it to be, but we're going to allow the machine to do that adjustment for us. It's normal rotation starting from the lowest point, which is where we were just at. Now we're going to start to bring the needle up in its normal rotation while holding that hook point right behind our needle. This is where those marks on the back of our needle are going to come into play. We need to get that hook point to touch right between the two marks that we made on our needle earlier. Finding those two marks in our hook assembly, once we get the needle into the correct position and we hold our hook assembly so that point is right between those two marks, then we can just snug the very top screw that's in the machine. And snug meaning just barely tight. We don't want to tighten any of the screws in the machine until we know for absolutely sure that it's where we want it to be. And I always, once I have that screw snug, I'm going to make the machine do full revolutions all the way up, all the way back down again to make sure that we're going to clear everything on the machine. Right now is going to be the time to make any changes if they need to be made, as far as where it's touching. If there's anything off, you're not going to clear that hook assembly as things rotate. So it's real easy for us to tell right away if we've got a problem. The next step in the process is the needle deflection, and that is to see how far the needle is pushed out of the way each time that hook point crosses behind it. Yes, with the Millennium and any of the APQS quilting machines, that needle has to be pushed out of the way. That's a completely different thought process than you'd use with a regular domestic machine. So as you're rotating your machine to pull your needle up and down, you want to see if that needle is pushed out of the way when the hook goes past it. We either need to pull the hook closer to the needle or push the hook away from the needle. You don't want to see the entire needle bend in half when that hook goes by. You just want to see the tip just wiggle a little bit. Now that we have our deflection set on our hook assembly, we can very slowly start to tighten down our screws holding our hook on the shaft. This screw we've already snugged. If you rotate the hook assembly a little more, you can get to the next screw, which you snug. Before I tighten any of the screws down, every time I tighten a screw, I come back and check my deflection again. There are some times when tightening a screw can change the pitch of the hook assembly and you can lose your deflection, or your deflection can be increased. If the deflection still looks good, then we can continue on to the third screw. Snug that down. Again, check it. Deflection still looks good. Then we can slowly start tightening the screws one at a time. Now I don't want to do the final super tight on these screws until I know that everything is okay. Because that final torque that you put on the screws is when we get the divots in the shaft, and we don't want to have to start all over again. Go on to our second screw. This screw on the flat side of the hook assembly, you need to be kind of careful of, since it doesn't have the big fat head on it like the other two screws do. It's easy to snap one of these sides off. So when you're tightening it, just go as snug as you can. Again, check your deflection. Okay, then we come to our third screw. Tighten that down. Check it again. Okay, everything looks good here. Now you get out your long-handled flat blade screwdriver and you tighten this down like you're really angry with the machine. Get mean with it. That's that final tightening on that screw. That's what keeps that hook assembly in place. Keeps it from coming out of time on its own. That's good news. One more screw. Okay, deflection still looks good. Okay, so we've done our needle bar depth. We've done the rotation, the actual timing of the timing process. We've done our deflection. Our hook assembly is in place where we want it to be. Our last step in the timing process is adjusting the position of our hook finger. The hook finger again is that piece that holds your bobbin basket, keeps it from rotating as your hook assembly turns. The main job of this hook finger is to make sure that basket doesn't turn out of position, to make sure that needle always has the oval slot in the basket to go down into. We want this finger to be into the little rectangle shaped cutout on the very leading edge of the basket, just enough to keep the basket from spinning. Each time the hook assembly rotates, your thread travels around the end of your hook finger on every single stitch. If you have that hook finger too close, it's not going to allow your heavier threads in between those two pieces. So we loosen the screw that's underneath, holding the hook assembly on. And we're going to advance this hook finger about 1/3 of the way into that oval shaped cutout. Tighten up the screw holding the hook finger in place, and your timing process is complete. Very last step now is going to be to get our needle plate back in position. You can see we still have our needle plate off to the side of the machine. We just need to loosen this screw That's holding those washers in place for us. We'll remove the screw at the front end of the machine. We're just going to slip this needle plate over on top. Remember our thick and thin gold washers that are underneath that needle plate. We do need to make sure those stay. Okay, once those are in position, we're going to snug our screw, get it started. Tighten down both screws. One thing too, make sure before you have this tightened down that the hole in your needle plate is lined up with your needle. That can be a big mistake when you turn the machine on. Get your screws down snug. Just one more quick check we're going to do with the machine before you're ready to start sewing. Now that we've got our needle plate back in position, I'm actually going to let the machine do a needle up down cycle a couple of times under its own power, just to make sure that there's nothing that's gone out of position in all this hard work that we've done. So I'm doing control yellow for a needle up down. Everything looks good. We haven't had anything jam. So we can turn the machine on, and you're going to be listening for a slight tick sound when the machine is running in a slow speed. Don't know if we'll be able to pick it up on the camera here, but we'll give it a try. That tick sound that you're hearing is that timing that we did. That's good. That's a good sign. That means you're not going to have skip stitches. The only thing we have left to do is thread up your machine and take off sewing. Timing is done.